So, for most people, the live action Transformers films are just 2 hour showcases of massive explosions, slow motion action, and giant robots punching each other through buildings. But for true fans of the franchise, buried underneath all that chaos are some genuinely shocking and heartbreaking deaths that still sting to this day. Whether it's the lost potential of a character, the emotional weight of the scene, or just how unfair some of these deaths were. Some were pointless, some were devastating, and some felt like they were written purely just to ruin our day. And so today, I want to relive that trauma by going through and ranking every single live action Transformers death by just how devastating they really were. Now, to avoid spending 45 minutes just talking about nameless drones and background characters, I'm going to be using a tier list system. This basically just allows me to blitz through the lower tiers, focus on the deaths that actually matter, and then finish off with my top 3 most devastating deaths. And so, without further ado, let's begin this ranking by starting at the very bottom of our list with the first tier. Tier 1. The Who tier. None of these deaths meant anything to me at all. They are your generic drone armies and random background characters that were solely put in the film just so they could die. If your name isn't on the toy packaging, you're probably ending up in here. We have all the Decepticon, Predacon and Terracon drones, all the KSI drones and Lockdown's mercenaries, Oreobot, the Talisman Knight, the Skullitrons, and all the unnamed Seekers in the Bumblebee movie. All gone, all forgotten. Tier 2. The Barely Counts tier. This tier is reserved for the named characters whose deaths do technically count, but the films never bothered to pay them any attention. The main character in this tier is definitely Devcon from Dark of the Moon. He had such a cool design just for him to barely get any screen time before being killed off in the background. The other characters in this tier are Frenzy, Sideways, Alice, the Constructicons, Ravage, Scorponok, the original Primes, the Dreads, the Driller, Stinger, Canopy, Dreadbot, Mohawk, Infernicus, Freezer, and finally Novocaine. Definitely no love lost for most of these characters, however for some I do wish we could have seen more of them before their demise. Tier 3. The Satisfying tier. This tier is for the deaths that didn't necessarily make me feel sad, but rather felt satisfying and justified for the character. For example, we have Brawl, who put up an incredible fight against each of the Autobots and was eventually taken down after a long and hard fought battle. The character had a great presence and went out at the right time and in the right way. This sentiment also applies for Megatron from the 2007 movie, Grindor, Laserbeak, Starscream, Lockdown, Shatter, Dropkick, and Scourge. They each served their purpose and their deaths felt like a justified victory for our main heroes. No complaints here whatsoever. Tier 4. The Wasted Potential tier. Now this is where things start to hurt just a little bit. Most of these characters had great designs and great introductions, but they either never really went on to do anything, or they were killed off before they even got the chance. The worst offenders of this, by far, were the RC triplets, Cliffjumper, and Onslaught. These characters each had major roles in previous continuities, but yet in the live action films they were barely even allowed to exist before they were swiftly killed off. As for the other characters in this tier, we have Bonecrusher, Blackout, Devastator, The Fallen, Soundwave, Shockwave, Leadfoot, Nitro Zeus, Blitzwing, Apelink, Nightbird, and Battletrap. Had these characters been given more development or screen time, their deaths could have been a lot more impactful. As it stands, however, they just didn't manage to reach their potential before they were ultimately killed off. This is definitely more of a disappointing tier rather than a sad one. Tier 5. The Actually Sad tier. Here is where the deaths really start to mean something to us. Whether it's because the scene itself was sad, or because we had a personal attachment to the character, either way, these deaths definitely hurt. we have the likes of Jetfire, who was a very likeable and surprisingly deep character with a death that felt just as sad as it was heroic. Sentinel Prime, who was a compelling villain with twisted yet understandable motives, begging for his life before being killed off. Megatron from Dark of the Moon, who had literally just saved Prime's life and even proposed a truce to end the war, just for Prime to then immediately kill him without even any consideration. And finally, the Dark of the Moon Autobots, who were abruptly killed off screen with no proper send-off and no time to say goodbye. Each of these characters had traits that made us grow attached to them, and so when it came to their deaths, we definitely felt a slight punch to the gut. Tier 6. The Devastating Tier. Now, these deaths weren't just sad, they were heartbreaking. They left a gaping hole in our hearts, and we were never really the same after watching them. From being completely blindsided by Jazz's brutal death in the first movie, to watching in complete disbelief as Optimus is stabbed in the back in Revenge of the Fallen, to the utter shock of seeing Bumblebee himself get impaled by Scourge in Rise of the Beast, all the way to the tragic sight of watching Airazor get put down by one of her closest comrades. Each of these moments left me stunned in my seat as I desperately tried to comprehend what I had just witnessed. I still to this very day find myself watching these films and silently hoping that Jazz escapes from Megatron, or that Airazor somehow manages to overcome Scourge's infection, all just for me to then have to sit through and relive the heartbreak all over again. These deaths were definitely some of the most devastating deaths in the franchise. However, as sad as they were, I still think that there are 3 more deaths that were even more devastating than all of the rest. And so, in the number 3 spot, we have Q's death from Dark of the Moon.
B, I think they're going to kill us.
Now, I can't really say that Q is one of my favourite characters from the Bayverse, as I never really digged his design, nor did I really get to spend too much time with him. But what makes his death one of the saddest deaths for me is just how drawn out and emotional the scene was. Q is captured alongside the other Autobots and is under the impression that they will be spared as prisoners, just for Soundwave to suddenly change his mind and for Q to be the first picked for execution. The way he stumbles and begs for his life whilst being shoved into place is just so emotional and really tough to watch, as you can only imagine how he must have felt in such a hopeless situation. Seeing such an old and vulnerable character be mercilessly taken out like this will always get me emotional, regardless of how attached I was to the character themselves. Q definitely did not deserve a death like this, and I still find it tough to watch no matter how many times I put this film on. Now on to our number 2 spot, and taking the second place on this list is Ratchet from Age of Extinction.
Where is Optimus Prime? Never.
I still remember the way this scene made me feel the first time I saw it. From the sheer dread as Cemetery Wind approached and surrounded Ratchet, to the utter terror of seeing him be ruthlessly gunned down, all the way to the absolute depression of seeing a torn apart Ratchet refuse to give up Optimus Prime's location and then proceed to have his spark ripped out of his chest. This character had been with us since the very beginning and had become such a staple to the point where it seemed almost impossible that he would ever actually die. And so, to see him be torn apart and blown to pieces like this just completely devastated me and left me stunned in my seat. I still feel my heart drop when it gets to this scene in the film, and I still get emotional upon seeing what's left of him accept his death and then have his spark ripped out. I will never get over this death, and I will never forget the way it made me feel the first time I saw it. But however, there is just one more singular death that not only scarred me as a child, but actually left me in a state of grief and mourning for the loss of the character. And this death is none other than the tragic death of Ironhide in Dark of the Moon. I've still not gotten over this death. Ironhide was my favourite character in all of Transformers, and I could not wait to see him in action in this film. I loved seeing him take out both Crankcase and Crowbar, and I was eagerly waiting to see him in the final battle. But just as I let my guard down, Sentinel Prime suddenly revealed his betrayal and immediately proceeded to shoot Ironhide in the back twice and then once more whilst he was on the ground. I cannot even begin to describe the level of shock and horror that I felt during this scene. And it only proceeded to get worse as we are then forced to watch our beloved Ironhide slowly and no doubt excruciatingly succumb to the rust and crumble away before our very eyes. The sight of this brutal death genuinely traumatized the child me, and I have still never truly managed to get over this death all these years later. Ironhide was a favourite character for many, and his death was a defining moment in all of our lives and childhoods. He 100% deserves the title of the most devastating Transformers death of all time. But with that, that was my complete ranking of every live-action Transformers character death. Which of these deaths hit you the hardest, and which do you feel I ranked way too high or way too low? Make sure to let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, then please feel free to leave a like and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future Transformers related content on this channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.